A couple of weeks ago, we started a series called The Gift of Peace, an Easter series. And we began that series learning about the disciples and how they were being instructed by Jesus as Jesus was getting ready to go to his death, be crucified and buried, and the resurrection. And there were three key verses. We read a lot of scriptures, but there were three key verses that came out of this that I want to share with you just briefly. The first was in John chapter 14. Jesus talking to the disciples. He says, I am leaving you with a gift. I am leaving you with a gift of peace of mind, and peace and heart. And the peace I give is a gift the world cannot give. So don't be troubled or afraid. So what we've learned in the last couple of weeks is gift. The word gift is a possession. It's not a set of circumstances. It's not your favorite place that you go on vacation. It is a gift, and it passes all the circumstances that you're in, and it brings tranquility in your heart and in your mind. It covers all the anxieties, all the fears, all the tormented thoughts that you have, and it's only available through a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Then we looked how the apostles begin to apply this. Colossians chapter 3, verse 15. Paul wrote, and let the peace. Very key phrase, let. Let the peace that comes from Christ rule. Another very important part that we learned in our hearts. For as members of one body, you are called to live in peace. Always be thankful. So peace is not automatic. It's not circumstantial. But it comes through a relationship with Jesus, and we have to learn to let it and then give authority to it to let it rule. Then finally in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 14, Paul wrote, work at living in peace. In a world full of drama, we got a lot of people who need to work at living in peace. Work at living in peace with everyone, and work at living a holy life. For those who are not holy will not see the Lord. So this gift of peace, requires us to use it, and it's been given to us, and we must give it permission to have control in our life and authority in our life so that our hearts and our minds will be protected. Then last week, we finished in Mark chapter 14, verses 32 to 34, where Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane with the disciples, and he prayed intently to the point that his sweat had turned to blood. And we learned to watch that at a very traumatic time, Jesus show us how to let peace rule. Now, peace that Jesus talks about didn't change the circumstances. It didn't change the trauma. It didn't change the turmoil. It didn't change the pressure of the situation. But that peace that guarded his heart and his mind gave him strength to go through it. So this week, many of you are familiar with the story. As Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, the temple guards came and arrested Jesus. Judas had betrayed him, had left, sold Jesus out, told him where Jesus was at. They bring the temple guards to him, and they drag him back through the streets of Jerusalem in front of the Sanhedrin. And while he is being dragged through the streets to the Sanhedrin is when Peter denies him 3 times. Then we see in John chapter 18, verses 28 through 40, that Jesus is took before Pilate. And Pilate sentences or issues the order for him to be beaten. And then finally, he issued the order for him to be crucified. And that brings us to the point that I want to focus on today. After all the disciples have scattered, the betrayal of Judas, he has been beaten. He is now sentenced to be crucified. There is a place called the Via Dolorosa, where Jesus carries the cross through the streets of Jerusalem. There's been many attempts over the years to depict actually what happens, and I'm sure there's lots of opinions on what happens. But in that period of time, Jesus shows us how we can have peace and when everything seems to be against us. You see Jesus wearing the crown of thorns. You see where he has been beaten. You see where he is carrying the cross. It's too heavy for him to carry. He's falling down. His mother approaches him, and yet he still has enough peace to look at his mom and say, with God, everything is possible. That's the peace that Jesus is trying to help us understand. And understand that it's a gift that we can receive. It's that peace that helps us get through the difficult trials. I wished I could tell you that the peace that comes from God just gets you out of all the circumstances. No, what it does, it helps you deal with the circumstances. So Jesus is carrying this cross. He's walking down through the city of Jerusalem, and he's going to carry it to Calvary. He's been lied about. He's been betrayed. He's been spit on. He's been falsely accused. Many of the same voices that were crying out, Hosanna, just a few days earlier are the ones who hollered out, crucify him. He knew he was about to die, and yet he could still bring encouragement. Jesus knew he could not find peace through the relationship of his disciples. They weren't there to support him. They were gone. Those he had chosen were now scattered. He had to depend upon the peace that he was telling them about. And then we have to remember that Jesus is the Prince of Peace. As he walked to Calvary, a place he knew that the physical part of his life would end, he willingly endured one of the most horrible deaths known to man. Yet while hanging on the cross, he was able to still have peace and encourage others. Enduring the most excruciating pain a person could endure, Jesus was willing to forgive the ones who had put him in pain. Now, it may sound a little too simple, but I believe that that peace that Jesus talked about, that peace that kept him on track, on the mission that he was supposed to have, is what enabled him to say, I forgive those who are doing this to me. And then to have compassion upon the thief that was on the cross. I woke up this morning and I was thinking about that term, it is finished. Now, theologically, we understand that that's the beginning of a new covenant. We understand that the dying and the shedding of the blood that's there on Calvary. But how many of us, without near that much pain, would have probably, instead of saying, it is finished, would have said, I'm done. I'm so glad he didn't say, I'm done, and quit. He said, it is finished. He finished it. You would think that that is the end of a story, but it's really the beginning of a brand new covenant. The reason that we're here, it separates this religion from every other religion. Every religious leader that you can find and you want to compare Christianity to, there's a tomb to go to. There is a tomb for Jesus. The difference is it's empty. It's empty. And so we're here to celebrate the resurrection. Thomas was a lot like you and I. Sometimes we want to believe, but we need a reminder. We need something tangible. We need something that we can touch and feel. It's not that Thomas didn't have faith. He was just struggling internally. In that upper room, when Jesus was instructing them and about the peace and the things that was going to happen, the disciples perhaps didn't comprehend everything that they needed to comprehend. They didn't understand everything they needed to understand, much like you and I, until we're put into the test, put into the fire. And one of the great things about this is Jesus knew that among the disciples that Thomas was struggling, and he went to him and began to speak to him.